they're on it, but the point that we're trying to make is, what could have been the alternative if we had decided to rescue, to intervene? It would have been completely different. They did nothing. It took about 3 years' time. Lots of women trafficked, abused through that club, and in the end, the police intervened. It was a big police operation in the end. The church could have been at the forefront of this in terms of intervening. Didn't do it. Didn't have the moral courage. Cultural literacy wasn't there necessarily to take. It's the Pentecostal church. And missed out on an opportunity to lift Christ up, to get the people to follow, to say the God that we serve is a God who was concerned about the least of these. The people who are being trafficked. Raises questions about the book of Esther, doesn't it, with the trafficking of the women taking place, and how the religious people can collude with the trafficking of young women. There's a brilliant critique of the book of Esther written by an African-American womanist theologian, forgotten her name. We had her come and teach us 2 years ago, but I've forgotten her name. It'll come back to me. But it raises questions about how easily we can collude with this injustice rather than countering. Okay, the last one. Last one then is, look, decolonize the theology. Key issue. You could listen, if you're not doing this stuff, you're about 10 years behind where everybody else is at, because our kids are doing this. You know, took my kids, 16-year-olds, to party on talking about decolonizing courses in this. My goodness, I was really awesome. Let's go. Make sure I keep on top of this. The kids are talking about it. Mixed group of kids, they're on top of this, reeling the way in which colonialism has bequeathed us with a culture and ideology of politics and a way of being in the world that leaves one group of people to dominate other people in every aspect of human existence. We're trying to decolonizing every subject, not just theology. Here is a bit slow. We did it with post-colonialism back in the day, but decolonizing theology in Britain is still slow-paced. Happening across the Caribbean, happening across the African continent. African Americans are wrong with this. They're always tired with it. They're moved into fugitivity now, is their big thing. Move beyond it because they've done this work. We need to do some catching up. Why? Because you'll find young people who are listening to hip-hop cultures. They're talking about this stuff. They're doing this work. They're realizing that many of the norms that we were taught as norms of faith were nothing more than European norms. European imposition on the text and on the ideas. Would this get played out more often? It got played out more often in terms of the image of Jesus. I was going to show you something, else there, but I'm going to go to another piece to illustrate.
When you think of what Jesus looks like, what do you see?
How was this played out? And it's still being played out around representation of Christ. I'm going to show you a short piece on this, and then we're going to go into groups, do some group work, and come back and have a plenary. It's a short piece by The Root. This is a secular magazine online that engages with a range of subjects. Did Decolonizing Christ a few years. Think about it. A secular magazine doing this work. That's how they've done. They've moved ahead. This is their critique of the looking at decolonizing the person of Christ.
Robe, crown of thorns, beard, Jesus's, maybe a halo. But what color is his skin? Today's baggage, white Jesus. It's no secret that Jesus Christ, known in Christian circles as the Son of God, is often depicted as a white man with long, luscious locks. But how did Jesus ever become so widely accepted as being white? Films, TV, even cartoons have been pushing this representation. And we can't forget when Megyn Kelly brought Jesus into her infamous Santa meltdown.
I mean, Jesus was a white man too, but you know, it's like...
Slow your roll. From what I can remember of my Sunday school days, the Bible stories take place in what is now called the Middle East. I chatted with Professor Carrie Day, an associate professor of constructed theology and African American religion at Princeton, to help me figure out where I should begin. How is Jesus physically described in the Bible?
We really don't see any depiction sort of phenotypically of what Jesus looks like in the biblical text, and that was intentional. I think that it's important to note that in the early Christian communities, there was actually an avoidance of putting images of Jesus. In general, images of God were seen as idolatry.
But we do know that in the Bible, Jesus' feet are compared to burnished bronze.
However you fall on what Revelation means, we already have clues. The first clue is that he was a Jewish man. They were nomadic people. Part of the misnomer is that a Jew is a Jew that phenotypically looks like a European Jew. And we tend to sort of ascribe that to the way Jesus looked and who Jesus was. But instead, what I'm suggesting is that you had all of these diverse diasporas, many of them that were Afro-Asiatic, that in many ways then helps us to reflect on Jesus in our contemporary language as a person of color.
So, Jesus might not be a white dude? This is a touchy subject, a hotly contested debate. Scholars, lay people, no one seems to agree. With all of his Jesus speaking parables, I found myself having a tough time. So I called on someone who was called on by the Lord. Gary V Simpson is the head pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ. He's also an associate professor of homiletics.
When you want to sound important, it's just saying, I'm a preaching professor, you say, I teach homiletics.
Simpson was the son of a preacher, but coming up, he was pretty clear on what he believed Jesus looked like.
I never really got caught up in the kind of dominant whiteness of Christ. I know that there were depictions of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus in places because those were the people who were publishing the materials that we were reading in our local Sunday schools.
Can you just elaborate a bit on that, how we sort of came to have this widely accepted depiction?
I don't know how widely accepted it is. I think it is Westernly accepted. When we read the Bible and the expansion of Christianity, we're actually talking about its Western movement.
Y'all know what he's talking about. That saying, to the victor goes the spoils. Let's go all the way back to the 4th century. Here's how it went down. Constantine, an emperor in ancient Rome, converted to Christianity. Later, it was legalized and became the official religion of the Roman Empire.
Hallelujah!
Christians were no longer persecuted. This changed the entire game. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did its ideologies and cultures. And of course, the dominating representation of a European white Jesus.
From those moments on, expansion of this idea, we even talk about classical music or classic periods of art. We're really talking about Western period.
And Western like white.
Western like white, yeah.
But the earliest paintings of Jesus popped up around the 3rd century CE. This is a couple of centuries after Jesus lived. So I hit up an art scholar who could take us back in time. This is Dr. Pamela Patton. She's the director of the Index of Medieval Art at Princeton University. So how did those illustrations look? Can you describe them for us?
A lot of them, especially the very, very early ones, were quite subtle, and this is because they emerged when Christianity was still not officially legal in the Roman Empire.
So initially, since Christianity wasn't legal, artists had to be discreet with their work. Fast forward to the 4th and 5th century, Christianity became the official Roman religion. Remember that whole spiel about Constantine?
That's when you begin to see more imperial, royal images of Christ. You see, enthroned figures. You see sort of bearded philosopher type being brought in. So in early Christian images, we're talking about images that are made in the Mediterranean and the old Roman Empire. The people in charge there, the consumers and makers of images, are largely white people, white Mediterranean people. Later on, I think that color begins to acquire a kind of more self-conscious symbolic weight in a lot of images, and particularly by the middle of the Middle Ages, you start to see dark skin and light skin really becoming freighted with meanings.
So what did these colors mean?
As you follow the texts and eventually the images into the later Middle Ages, you see that people begin to use color visually as well as a metaphor for sinfulness or purity, and sometimes as a metaphor for sort of evil versus good. Later on, you also start to see color associated with foreignness and difference.
How have the expectations of portraits evolved from then to now?
I think it's important to recognize that the expectations people had of portraiture in the era when images of Jesus were developing are very different from the expectations we bring to portraiture today. When images of Jesus developed, first of all, they didn't have much idea what he looked like, and second, it wasn't as big a concern as creating a sort of consistent, recognizable image that told you the things you really needed to know about who he was and why he was important.
Despite the intention of early artists, this white Jesus stuck and was carried on by the popular culture. Even though some countries have their own artistic versions of Jesus, in the United States, this idea of a European-looking Jesus can have dangerous implications. Tabitha L. Jones-Jalvet, a professor of higher education and one of the authors of White Jesus, says that there's been a whitewashing process over time and that white Jesus is a function of white supremacy.
White Jesus is so much more than an icon. It's not neutral. And it's not neutral because it has been proliferated and it's expanded in terms of its presence over centuries. And it has been largely tied to what we call an imperial project, the agenda of a nation state. So when we think about sort of racial apartheid in the United States, which continues, we see that racial apartheid can be sustained using the white supremacist logic that flows from white Jesus. So
okay,
I see,
we'll pause it there. You can download it from the root.
The
rest of it, they talk a little bit more about education, how it gets played out in education. The point here is decolonizing theology is also about getting to the heart of it in terms of who we understand Jesus to be and how we have depicted Jesus and how those signifiers either empower some people and marginalize other groups of people. Part of the decolonial process is looking at how our history, our colonial history, led us to a place where this became normalized in the Caribbean parts of West Africa. And it had a certain power, and that power is still there today. My old Pentecostal church in Handsworth, pastor said to me, Robert, we'd like you to bless the church in some way. Bless the church. So pastor, I mean, pay up some money. Bless the church. I said, Pastor, I'm going to bless the church. I had a friend produce a black image of Jesus on the cross. Brought it in the church. Pastor, I love it. Put it behind the pulpit. Started to preach. People started to get uncomfortable. The pastor was saying, what's the problem? They had a meeting about it. The black people said, we feel uncomfortable with the black image of Jesus. I said, what are you talking about? It's a predominantly black church. They said, yeah, but it might offend a couple of the white people. The pastor said, well, what if it was the other way around? How many black people go to churches with a black Jesus? Most of them are white Jesus. You don't hear the white people saying, it might offend the black people. He said, hey, what's going on? It was the black people. We realized, the pastor said to me, the coloniality, Rob, it's still here. The second generation people. It runs deep in terms of how we have used this image to control people. Because what it says ultimately is whiteness is closer to godliness. And it means that, here's the thing, if you're in trouble, your own people can't save you. It's just the black people. Decolonizing it, one of the ways which people have done is have multiple images, or affirm non-traditional images, recognizing that all images are contextualized. None of them actually look like the first century a Jewish Palestinian person. I have to be careful if you say Palestinian. I said that in a recording, a radio piece in the Jewish Chronicle, in the New York Post at the right, go at me. I tell you what, you have to be careful when you mention Palestinian in anything, because they kind of created a discourse. Anything Palestinian, I'm saying that Jesus is from Judea. Judea, won't use Palestinian. Judea, Jewish Judean, a man. How do it could be contextual? We could look at the original context, but what images do we have then that affirm the young children within our church? And of course it matters. Going back to Jeremiah Wright's church, Barack Obama's church, remember Barack Obama sent his children to this church. I went into their Sunday school where they had the under fives, learning, they go through the whole of the Bible with the under fives. Don't know how they do that because there's some saucy stuff in the Old Testament. Oh my goodness! They were looking at Moses and they were drawing Moses. Teacher came in, at their church you have to have a BA, Bachelor of Arts, to do Sunday school. They take it seriously. It's the hood. Trying to get the children out of the hood. Take the education seriously. They only had one colour. Black. Kids. I said, my goodness. I said, what are you about to say that we're doing? I said, psychological. We're telling them they've got a stake in this. We're telling them that the people in that part of the world are people of colour. What do you want? Us to give them pink crayons? They didn't look like that. I thought, my goodness. No wonder Obama's saying he was there for 20 years. All the people who've gone through that church, no wonder. And this is name drop as well. When we went there, I was sitting behind Common, the rapper. Common was there. I wanted to say to him, listen, I've got a little rhyme for you that you want to... Common was there with his bald head in front of me. And he said, the pastor said, Kanye's here next week. My goodness, we're there next week. It's a pop show. I can't. But the point I'm making is people were empowered from the early days at that church to see themselves having a stake. Well, what if you have a multicultural? Then paint more different colours. Find a different week. It's Black Folks Week, Brown Folks Week, this is yellow people, green people. Do it so that everybody has a stake within the story, not just one group who see themselves as being better and have a history. Because you might say, well, we don't see ourselves that way. But look at the history. That's why I said historicise. You stand within that tradition. So you have to find a way in which you resist it. So it does matter. So we cannot, if you're not prepared to do this work, it's problematic because the world has moved on. The churches have moved on. The TAB have done this work. The Rock New Testament Church of God, research the churches, that they're doing this work and they're drawing in the young people because it means something to them. It's important work. Now you might say, I can't do it, but what about those who were racialized as white? My math teacher was white. Came from Yorkshire. You can't get whiter than that. They are, aren't they? God's country. Came from Yorkshire, but had done the emotional and educational work so he could go into the inner city and teach the kids stuff they didn't know. Produced me. Produced 5 of us with PhDs. 5 of us from his class with PhDs by doing that work. I'm the poorest one now. I should have taken the maths more seriously. No, technology. I've done this religious gig. Produce people. My sociology teacher as an undergraduate had the most impact on me, white American. White American. Went to Vietnam, was a conservative, radical conservative Christian, went to Vietnam, changed his world. Because he realised Vietnam meant there was no place for critical thinking. He was walking in a line in a potato field, and he said he couldn't go to his commanding officer and say, they're going to shoot us. Because he did everything in his life after that to work against any kind of confirming thinking, strong critical thinker. First class with him, we put up a picture. We're doing sociology in the 1960s. This picture, I asked him a critical question because I'd read Malcolm. I said, yeah, but when Malcolm said blah, 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 he went, yeah. I was at that meeting. Put up another slide, he was there. Student was everywhere. Well, when in 63, King said, he goes, yeah, I was at that meeting. Put a picture, he was there. Oh my goodness, we were scared to say anything. Or the Vietnam rally in 60. Yeah, me and brothers were, and a picture with everybody. He'd done the work. So consequently, when he spoke to us, he spoke from a position of authority. I was there. I'd done it. I'd been there. He was racialized as white. It's no excuse. In fact, in many respects, it's not the color, it's the consciousness. I tell you the story now, but you can't repeat this. If you repeat it, we all get sued. Working with a major institution, have to be very coded. They said, we want to give money back for slavery. Fantastic. So we're going to write a check, 20 million, we want you to help us sort it out. Fantastic. I thought, well, you pay me the tithe. We believe in that Pentecostals. First fruit. Ain't gonna happen with. But it was the guy who was pushing it, called himself a white ally. He'd done all the training. And all the white showed me. And all the white, we got like this, boom, 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 it came to put the signature on it. It was some of the black people in the organisation who said, we're a bit scared. It might affect our careers. We don't know what it will mean. It might look bad. And they pull back. Pull back could have been the first major institution to do this work. Pull back. And I realised the person pushing this was racialised as white. The people who were saying, we're not too sure, were racialised as black. You see, so often, colour doesn't necessarily guarantee consciousness. That's why when people say, Trevor was saying we've got more black people in the opposition. I think it's great that in the opposition, but what have they sacrificed? All of them are carbon copies of their colleagues sitting next to them. They wouldn't say black or Asian to a goose, too frank. Can't foreground anything to do with ethnicity because it's a vote loser. So it's what kind, we've always been asking that question. It's not just about representation, it's the type of people that we have. Because within our culture we know that there are people who can get to the top and sell out. We've got names for them. We know it doesn't matter. So the consciousness matters. So, just in terms of summary, before we just pull this together, and we're going to have some opportunity for some questions. As you can see, I've skipped through a bit of this. So look, in conclusion, I think there's some learning to do in terms of engaging with second and third generation African diaspora Christians. There needs to be a transformation of ministry, and it is doable. I think it's one of the few spaces in terms of public life where one can retool, reset one's work in order to engage and to be transformed. And I think we need to entangle, we need an entanglement of these issues. All of these issues, rather than marginalising them, bringing them to us to the centre of our preaching and our teaching and our discourse. And this is one of the most wonderful sermons I've heard over the years. There have been people who have done this work and then weave them into the biblical text. I was at a church with a white minister a few weeks ago, and they must have known I was coming because he did Stephen, and he went into Steve Biko. You know what I mean? I thought, oh, this is good! You know, weaving together. Talked about the Stephens in Africa. My goodness! You know what I mean? Predominantly black people got it. Filled with young people because this guy had done the work. Knew not the buttons to press, because that sounds like it's psychology. Knew the themes that would touch their hearts. So we talk about in Christian language, isn't it? Knew the themes that would touch their heart and would bless their souls. So we need to then think about how we bring them to. How can you do it practically? Come and do an MA with us at Queen's. One of my gigs, after advertising. Come and do the MA. We're doing an MA in Black Transformative Ministry. And you know what? Because Queen's is validated by the Dutch, you know the Dutch do everything social justice styling. So it's cheap. It means Britain is cheap. Because the Dutch system still believes that education should be a human right for everybody. Do the work. Come and do a master's degree. Learn this stuff. Become fluent in this language, these ideas, so that you can then go out and engage the next generation. Don't just like, I want to come to Birmingham, it's the best part of the world. Then you can do this work. You've got the Baptist, you've got Anthony Reddy. Do the work at the Baptist College. And go and sit under Anthony Reddy and the work that he's doing there in the back, where's it? Regent's Park. You've got something at the back. You can fit all the black people teaching theology in Britain into the boot of my car and still have room for luggage. So the fact that you've got one of them at a Baptist college, I'd be making the most of it. Check this out, from what I know, it's part of the problem. He's only there part-time. Double check me on that, but I think that it's only there part-time. Surely, I think that's right, isn't it? This gig is only part-time. No. You've got a leading global black theologian. God has sent him to you. Give him a part-time gig? Come on now. Raise his questions. Raise his serious questions. See, because I'll say that's the Baptist way. So they give me 3 jobs. I'm Pentecostal, you see. They're working on a different kind of trajectory. But raise his questions. So doing the work, if you can't do further education, if you can't make it to Regent's Park, do the reading. Be more than happy to supply you with a reading list. In fact, you don't even need me to supply you. You go online and they'll tell you 10 most important books in black sociology, 10 most important books in black theology, 10 most important books in terms of womanist theology. There are 3 that I would recommend. If you haven't read James Cone's God of the Oppressed, read God of the Oppressed. James Cone lays down the theological foundations for black liberation theology. If you want to do work on womanist theology, go to his former colleague, Dolores Williams, Sisters in the Wilderness, Womanist God Talk, same publisher, Orbis, lays down the theological foundations for a womanist theology of survival, not the liberation that the men are talking about, womanist theology of survival. And then if you really want to engage with understanding the dynamics of diaspora, read the book by that 3-brain sociologist, Paul Gilroy. Read his book, The Black Atlantic. The 2nd highest quoted book in black studies worldwide. Second only to what? Toni Morrison and Nobel Prize winners' books. It's important. It's from Britain. It's one of his Londoner. South London produced this guy with 3 brains. He's head of African American studies at Yale. From South London. Genius. Now back at UCL. Read his stuff. My goodness, we couldn't even get him to Birmingham. We couldn't afford him. So I'm going to London. work with the Baptists. He says, work with the Baptists. But yeah, but he's one of you. He's down here. You are so blessed with these resources, with these opportunities. I would take every opportunity to do the work. Okay, it's now half-past. What we're going to do is we're going to try and work in groups for 10 minutes and then come back with 20 minutes of questions. So what we're going to do, we're going to do it really simple. Just if there's 3 of you sitting together, 2 of you sitting together, just come up with some questions. I just want you to think of 2 things. Just say what has struck you as being most significant for you, and what would you like to know more about? And then what know more about is the critical question. So what do you think has been beneficial to you? What do you think you need to know more about because it grates? You know, and you can ask me anything because, like I said, I'm not frightened of anybody. But the wife is picking me up. So if we do that, no, she's not picking me up. But if we do that for 10 minutes, turn to your neighbour, you know, 2 or 3, 2 questions quite simply. I just want you to find something that you feel has resonated with you, something that has challenged you, and where you'd like to raise a critical question. So we'll do that for 10 minutes, and that will give us 20 minutes for a clean room. Okay? Okie dokie? Okay? Okie dokie? Thank you. Okay, if there are, let's begin with the, let's work in this in 2 ways. Let's have some volunteers say the first part, what they found helpful, and then we'll get into the critical questions afterwards. And I won't play like the altar call. You know, like one of my pastors, when he used to do the altar call, he'd keep going until everybody turned up at the altar. You know what I mean? So we'll stop on time and make sure that you're ready for lunch. Okay, resonance. Go ahead.
First of all, thanks, Robert. That was excellent. Really got me thinking. Began to read some of your books. I think you have 4 brains.
No. Yeah, but 3 of them are absent.
The thing that really helped and challenged us was this idea about courage.
Yeah.
And I would say I have courage, but the problem is with that courage comes a kind of a wisdom that says, well, should I act?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle. How do you? When does one act?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And liberation theologians have taught us you act and then you think about it. If you think about it, you're not going to do anything. That's the reality. So the trick is, I try and teach this to my children. Do something, we'll deal with the aftermath afterwards. It's better that you do something than nothing at all. So that's the challenge. So the real question then is, how in our preaching and teaching do we nurture radical action and provide space for critical reflection? That's the challenge. You know, and if you do that, then you will always be willing to take the risk. I'll give you another prison story. So I'm going back into prison. We've just got funding to work in Winchester prison. That's a posh prison, you know, so it's not like Birmingham. No, it's not a posh prison if you've been there. I know some of you spent some time there. I've seen it. I'm story. When I taught, one of the prisons that I taught in, they put in these fascists to shut it down, because mainly black and Indian guys would come along to this course. So they put in this big, massive neo-Nazi, you know, full regalia, all tattooed and everything, came in the back of the class. And the guys were, I always had like, you know, some hardcore Jamaicans at the front just to keep things. So they were like, hey, want us to take in? I said, no. I said, we're ready, you know, they're ready to take him down, you know, because they didn't frightened of nothing. So I said, no. I said to them, God's Spirit, when I used to go there, I used to pray in tongues. So Pentecostals do that, you know. So I used to pray in tongues around the classroom, go there half an hour, because I was frightened. Courage, I was frightened. I said, listen, Spirit needs to be in here, because I'm too frightened to deal with these people. No security. He came in, sat at the back of the class, and made sure it's the best lesson I ever taught. Really, really good. We used to teach ethics through films, film study course. So how do you teach men ethics? I'm not going to write it down. These men with a reading age of 30 watch films. They got the films, applied it to their lives. He stayed. At the end of the class, he came up to me. I thought, oh goodness, Monday the yard is here. He said, can I come back next week? I said, yeah. He kept coming back. I saw him a year later in Birmingham city centre. He came up to me and gave me a hug. I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my goodness. I thought I was really uncool with my kids. I said, oh Dad, well yeah, I said, this is in prison. I said, oh, it's a bit rough. I said, it's fascist. He gave me a hug. And I said to my kids, well, you know, it took a certain degree of courage to allow this neo-Nazi. I don't know what journey he was on, but I was going to act first. If he gave me a kick in, I'd deal with it afterwards. But I wasn't not going to take the risk that we could impact his life. So I think it's methodology, and that's part of decolonizing our theology. Western theological methods, according to our Latin American brothers and sisters, work against any kind of structural change because they get us thinking all the right stuff and doing very little. Okay, so another one, resonance. Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
I was conscious of a couple of things. I was aware for myself that I was worried about all the white people in there.
Yeah.
When you spoke. So I was like, oh, I hope they're going to be okay.
but we're taught to do that.
That's right, yes.
But you know, understand, that's part of the coloniality. We're taught that actually we should be more concerned about people who are racialized as white, even if it's to our detriment. Why? Because that's how it works on the plantations. See, you know, you beat it into somebody. We are better. Our needs come before yours.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, you take that into the church. You see, so it's a big issue in young people. My goodness, these black people are so passive. And we say, oh, we're just loving our brothers and sisters. That's passive.
Yeah.
What about speaking truth to power?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a good point. I'm glad you said that. So it's courageous to say. Thank you.
And the other thing is spot on with regards to listening to our young people and then listening to my stepdaughter. I didn't quite understand half the stuff she was talking about. And I didn't actually believe it, you know, the stuff about colorism. And then listening to you and also understanding that this is a serious thing. It really is a serious thing amongst black young kids, especially the girls, that it's a real big issue about the colour of this. I remember once I said the word blick, and she was so upset about it. And I tried to explain to her, this is what how the South Africans used to say. She didn't know that part. She just knew that it was just an insulting word.
Yeah.
And so there is that gap. But if we don't understand that we've got to listen, and it is painful to listen, and that we have to listen, otherwise our churches are going to be empty.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the African Americans got there first. Read the womanist New Testament scholar Mitzi Smith. Her first book, Womanist Sass. Womanist Sass, and I can remember the subtitles. Womanist Sass, and it's about taking everyday domestic issues in the lives of working poor women and reflecting on Scripture as a New Testament theologian. Brilliant. She does it with people not being able to get their gas turned on, reflecting on stuff in Scripture we didn't know, talked about gas supply and BP. Brilliant work. She's got a second book coming out at this moment in time. If you're on Facebook, she loves people joining Facebook. Brilliant work. Mitzi Smith. Everyday domestic issues. Food, colour, bills, school, kids, husband. Reflects on them critically as a New Testament scholar. Brilliant work. So they've got there first. That's why I said Americans always have great stories as well. Meet them out, people, you know. Anyway, so another thing. Anyway, one more resonance, and we'll take the critical stuff. One more, something that's resonated with you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you so much. It was a fantastic morning. I resonated with the idea of listening, and particularly that we already have a model in the Baptist Church to listen to our members, and that's a church meeting. And it can be a place for empowerment, and it should be. And I think we as ministers have a responsibility to make sure that we hear the Spirit speak through all of our members and allow time for it.
Yeah, brilliant. Good stuff. Okay, let's deal with the critical questions now. Stuff where you think, hold on a minute, it was all right, I was with you until you said, well, you know what, I don't buy any of this, and you ain't going to change me because there's a show on this. Chris Rock has a skit called White People Who Know Black People Better Than Black People. I know this stuff, so I mean, you can't reach everybody, you know, but go ahead, critical stuff.
I thought what you said about learning, you know, doing the work, and this is a resonance as well.
Yeah.
But it's going to go on to something else. Right, I thought that was just great, and it's really, you know, I want to get back now and just read some of this stuff and what have you. But what I found hard was your part about black people tend to be found in certain jobs, or, you know, they're put in the church in manner, in certain roles and what have you. And I've got to say that we've got a really multicultural church, and I've not talking about whiteness, and who we are, and the institutional whiteness and the rest of it. But as a Christian, I never look at people in those terms. I look at them as what their gifting is. Right? I was speaking on Sunday on 1 Corinthians 12 on gifting. So we have a black lady speaking in 2 weeks' time. I don't think of her. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think of her as black. She's Dora, who's got a great gift at speaking. So why do we have to keep thinking colour?
Right. Good question. Let's take that part
Because
first.
I want to
There's
see
3 questions
people
there.
I want to see people as individuals.
That's good. I think it's a really good question. Look, I think it's a really courageous question to ask, and let me answer it in 2 ways. First of all, you're right. For some people, it is their gifting to sing, and they have voices like angels. Look, I'll name drop a bit. One of my goddaughters is Lola and Vula. And I can just go and have goddaughter all these great singers, but they don't give me anything back. Some of them, it's just their gifting. They're really talented people. However, the problem is 2 things. Historically, we've placed them in that position as the only thing they can do. So therefore, we need to disrupt that. We need to be aware of their history. Secondly, and what I do with my kids, listen, my whole nephews and nieces had it tough because none of them did sports. Because all of our family, we said, don't do it. Because we said to them, we know you're good at sports. It's in our genes. It's what we do as Jamaicans. Champs. It's what we do. We can do that. But here's the thing. Be countercultural. Do the things they don't expect you to do. Be in the places they don't expect you to go. Show them you can do your stuff excellently, you can do their stuff excellently, because we wanted to show them that there are other opportunities. Now, why does this count? It counts because if we do not disrupt those structures in the church, we then collude with the structures outside. What the structures outside show? Look at the NHS. Black and brown people at the bottom of the scale in terms of jobs. They ripped us off, first of all. My parents came here, my mother came here, meant to be SRM, put on the old SEM. Remember that trick? If you're old enough, what they did? Histories of discrimination. So how do you counter? It's partly making people aware that, listen, when I work with young black children, I say to them, that's a brilliant piece of art. Have you looked at Kehinde Wiley's exhibition? So I did. Go and see it. Get your mother to take it. I'm trying to ignite them with something that they didn't think that they were able to. That's a brilliant. Have you heard of the youngest ever PhD, a full professor at Harvard is a mathematician, is an economist. Let me share this stuff. But it ignites them because I'm trying to show them that they can do other things because that stuff, that's where the dominant images are. So yes, I'd expect 20% of the people to have the gifting. 80% of the people are just being pushed into stuff because that's what they're expected to do. So I don't believe it's just about that. And you can do both. Some people can sing beautifully and they can do other things as well. So it's complicated. I acknowledge that. Regarding the second part of the question, the problem is this. There is within the Christian tradition a colorblind Christianity. And it was dominant in the 1950s. In America in particular. So Billy Graham used to say, I don't see colour. People say, well, why weren't you then backing King? He didn't have the courage to do that because he'd lose his white friends. Didn't back it all. He said that everybody comes to black and white people can come to Billy Graham and fight the power. Didn't want to do that. It was big in the 50s and 60s. Got trampled on in the 70s, sociologically, because people realised if you don't see colour, you can't change things. None of us are colourblind. It doesn't exist. They started writing, there's a book called Colorblind Racism. It deals with how colourblindness doesn't then disrupt anything. It needs us to see the structure, because we can say, my goodness, look, we're all one in God. Then we look at the hierarchy and say, hold on a minute, we're still looking at clean it. How can we not see that? That's why I think we're called to be much more complex in terms of discernment, in terms of recognizing that in Christ there is no difference. But until that day of resurrection comes, we've got to deal with the fact that we live in an imperfect world where there are these inequalities, and we as the people of God have to resist them, have to go against them. And here's the problem. I often say to people, I'm the soft version. Wait until the hardcore angry people really turn up. This is the easiest, the Christian stuff. The people outside the church, they say, my goodness, you're so easy on those people with everything going on. So trust me, from me, it's better to see the structures and the inequality and work against them than not seeing them. You know, everybody who's spoken into my life, who's racial up, they've seen them. My math teacher, Mr. Ralph, said, they expect you to play football because they see you as a racehorse. He said, that's what they expect. Look at what all the black kids are doing in this school. He said, all of them. They're doing either sports or entertainment, nothing else. He goes, go against the flow. I said, I don't know if I can do it. He said, yes, you can. And then he told me one of the biggest lies ever. I said this to all of my students. If you ever study with me, you know this is the big lie. He said, nobody thinks the way that you do. You are gifted. I said, my goodness. My goodness, that's fantastic. And I realised he said that to all of us. Everybody in the group realised 10 years later. Oh, Mr. Rao's favourite told me I was it. He said to all of us. My goodness, you know what I mean? Why? Because he recognised that we could do other things. We could contribute to other parts of society. We weren't all meant. It's the dominant discourse which shapes us into thinking that we can only be in particular places. And here's the thing, church never becomes God, we're reversing all of that. You know? So I'm always weary, I'm always weary. I know you had black and brown people up here doing the music. I'm always weary because I'm saying, yes, it's the gifting. I don't mind it, but I'm kind of expecting that when it comes to the preaching and the teaching, there's a similar kind of over-representation at play. Then I'd be happy. I said, my goodness. So that's fine by me. I'm not going to say, oh, Robert was having a hard time. We're going to say, oh, he talked about music, all the black people playing music. I don't have a problem with that. I was going to join in with them. I was going to start singing myself because, you know, I'm up there. You know, I'm up there with the Glory Gang and the rest. You know, I'm not up there with Glory Gang and the city. But what I'm saying is, we have to ask ourselves critical questions about what we are reflecting in our worship and what we are reflecting in our church and what does it say about power. And to be honest, I don't take my kids to churches where all they see is black and brown people doing the stereotypical things. And if I do, I make them aware of it and I ask them, what does that make you think about us? Because 500 years ago, pictures were painted of us that had no head, which meant we were body people. We did the physical stuff. We did the entertainment. We did the labour. Right, so I say to them, look, this stuff is problematic in particular context or black church, and you've got to expect it. Then my question is, what about the women? Well, we've got always women up here. And then when it comes to the preaching and teaching, they're not the ones, only God speaking through the men. Now, I'm paid to do that. What theologians are meant to do, I'm meant to ask critical questions. So, well, I'm not always paid to do it, but I do it anyway. So the point I'm making is, you have to see it. Anthony Reddy has a best-selling book called Is God Colorblind? Read it, because he debunks the notion of colorblindness within Christianity. Yeah, sure, yeah, go ahead.
Right, thank you very much. It's been a very stimulating morning into afternoon. And, well, I'm from West Africa originally.
Ghana or Nigeria?
Ghana.
Ghana, listen. Well, if you go to Tamale, said Robert said, I'm a chief in Tamale. I said that, I'm an honorary chief in Tamale. Yes, you have to watch out what you say to me now. Where are you from?
I'm the Prince of Cape Coast.
But I still trump you. The people from up in Kumasi are the top people. Go.
But thank you very much for the discussion. I have lived my life in most of the spaces that you've described and have experienced almost everything that you have said on first hand. I worked as a school teacher in a predominantly black environment in London, in a London school, worked with a lot of black young boys on the Aim Higher project and had to get them to aspire for maybe what we will describe as upward mobility. Within the black community, upward mobility could probably be defined as moving from those black spaces and gravitating towards the white spaces where you change where you live, you change how you dress, you change how you talk, and you aspire to get into a Russell Group university, which is a good thing, and all of that kind of stuff. So I can identify with most of the things that you described today. It's very, very academic and very dense, And with my background in theology, I can understand most of the things that, or in diaspora and theology, sorry, I can understand most of the things that you are talking about. But again, I just want us to situate this within a pastoral context, where within this room we find a lot of people who are primarily Baptist ministers ministering within inner city London. And most of the things that you're talking about can be experienced on the streets of London, and again within the four walls of our churches. It's difficult because we know those issues are there, and sometimes we adopt a tokenism approach where we would like to celebrate particular occasions to make people feel that they are being included. Sometimes we may want to elect one person to join the diaconate because we want to make the church feel that we are all embracing. And sometimes we may even be appointed to serve on certain committees within the association and the union simply because we want to let people know we are occupying all those spaces. I have found it quite interesting because I was trying to balance between listening to you and having a look around to observe body language, which is part of my psychology. And I found that having a lot of us were acting like ostriches with our heads buried in the sand, knowing that we are feeling very uncomfortable, knowing that this is not a discussion that we would like to have, perhaps within this kind of tone. What I would like to say is that, yes, you've said all the hard things, but it could perhaps help us better if you rounded it up as a conversation which is necessary to be had within us as ministers, so that it's not just a situation of you coming and throwing everything at us, departing and creating an us and them conundrum, but rather a conversation that should continue, and a lot of learning that can be had between.
Let me respond to that. I think that you're completely right, and my intention and my hope is that you will continue the conversation. Here's the problem though. Let's keep it real. I've been doing this for 30 years. When I first started, and I was young and naive, I actually thought that the vast majority of clergy, not just Baptist, Anglican, Methodist, were committed to a kind of radical inclusion that the gospel talks about. I lost interest after 10 years of trying because I realized that most people were not. So then I shifted my focus to how can I empower black and brown people within those congregations. Because, like I said, people phone me all the time. All kind of, oh my goodness, the clergy, blah, blah, blah. I got one the other day. He said, oh, the church is paying for me to have therapy. I said to him, I'm in your church. So my work has been, how do we then empower? And that's what I've foregrounded. How can I empower black and brown people, if I'm dealing with stuff in terms of mainstream churches, so that they can at least feel they've got some tools to work with? What I have come to realise, and this may be hard for some people, again, so I've moved from that, is that in many respects, the Spirit is going to work where people are open and radical and committed to the change that needs to take place. In my experience, I'm sorry to say this, very few people are committed to that. And that's why everything I said today, this lecture is 30 years old. You see? So I hear what you're saying, and I pray and hope the conversation will continue. My experience has been that there are a handful, a small group of radical people who will do it. Most of the black and brown people who run with you and do it as well. So I've made that my focal point because in my limited experience, last 30 years in terms of what's in the UK context, that's where the gains are made. You know? So that's it. So I hope you continue it. It would be fantastic if we're still around in 30 years' time and I've still got the same lecture, I can just jazz it up a bit. You say, we've done it, we've done it, we've done it, we've done it. And that would be great. And listen, it's not just in terms of church groups. We said the same thing in theology in 1995. Redo your work over. There is a storm coming in the country. Do this stuff. It needs to be done. Went to all the conferences, said all the right things, went to all, listen, even taught the Baptist College of Spurgeons. Used to go, get back home, 2 o'clock in the morning, teach at 9 o'clock in the morning. Did that for 2 years at Spurgeon's to empower clergy, ministers, everyone who wanted to come out. Nobody came out, no few group of people come out. It was for free. Because the Baptist said we wouldn't pay for it. Used to teach there for free on an MA course for 2 years. Did that work. We did that work in theology. 30 years on, we're still in theological guild, still in the same place. Right? Now let me just say this is not just me. I produced the PhD students. My PhD students now working as sociologists. People like Kahindi Andrews are mentors. Kahindi's teaching black studies. Lisa Palmer, this is teaching black sociology over in Leicester. Anthony Reddy started off on a free access course I used to give back in the hood for anybody who wanted to do theology. Free access course, I knew there was talent out there. Anthony came on, listen, so in terms of getting, I've done my work. My work was to get the people there. The tragedy is, when I look around, they're all in social science. So it's left me with this particular, I'm keeping it real. My understanding of it, because I'm being honest, I believe God is a God of all. I believe God is capable of everything. But I tell you that, I put it in my book, racism is demonic. Yeah. Right? Demonic. The church's sojourn with racial terror for 500 years has left it, I'll use Pentecostal language now, I can get Pentecostal on you, it's left it demonically possessed with a spirit of racism. And I say that because I tried the rational approach. Sit down, reason with this. English approach. We tried it in terms of educational approach. And then it was my mother who said to me, I think it's deeper. I think it's deeper than that. And so in documentaries, exorcism, that's what's called, it's about filmmaking, a spiritual practice. My argument is this. Until there is an exorcism, we're off this demonic force within the church, you're not going anywhere. So here's the thing. You can talk to people, you can share experience, but unless you're going to take that demon out, and that seriously, I mean, Pentecostals get excited now. I tell you, I'm not the Pentecostal church. They go, oh, it's not the pastor be coming off now. Yes. Come on now! Oh! I'm trying to draw out the spirit. You know? The point I'm making is if we think about it even sociologically or even in terms of discourse, right? Outside of theological language, what I'm saying is there is a deeply rooted spiritual problem that can only be addressed spiritually. So how do we address it spiritually? And this is why I know it hasn't taken place. You repent. How many times you hear white folks come and say, we repent for that stuff we did. You know what we're going to do that? We're going to pay you back. That's why I made Empire Pays Back. Pay us back to 7.5 trillion. Jamaicans loved it. Gave me an award. It's bust. Right, broken in the post. Another issue. But the point of making that film was to say, here's secular repentance, because they sit in terms of finance. And that's why I know it hasn't happened. Yeah. You repent, you ask, it's what they told us to do on the planet. You repent, you ask for forgiveness. You produce the fruit of forgiveness. And then you move on collectively. And then there's the gift of forgiveness. When black and brown people, we've been programmed to forgive easy. You could come into my church, shoot everybody dead, and we forgive you the next day. It happened in America. We've written about it. Read about how we were programmed to forgive evil. Master would beat us. Do you forgive me? Yes. So the forgiveness is going to come. But we know it hasn't happened because the repentance.